There are moments in life when power doesn't raise its voice, doesn't demand attention, and doesn't threaten anyone in the room. It simply observes quietly while others expose who they really are. And this flight, a routine trip from Chicago to New York, became one of those moments. Because what should have been an ordinary boarding process slowly transformed into a lesson about prejudice, authority, and the dangerous assumption that some people are easier to dismiss than others. And stories like this are exactly why we tell them here on EchoStory. Because the truth often hides in places no one expects it to surface, especially at 35,000 feet above the ground. The terminal at O'Hare was loud and chaotic, rolling suitcases colliding with hurried footsteps, overhead announcements blending into a constant mechanical hum. And among hundreds of travelers stood a woman dressed simply, jeans, a neutral sweater, no designer bag. No visible status symbols. The kind of passenger airline employees often overlook without a second thought. And that was precisely the point. Because anonymity can be a powerful tool, and when she approached the gate with a valid first-class ticket already scanned and paid for weeks in advance, the first sign of trouble appeared not as anger but as indifference, a gate agent, whose smile evaporated the moment her boarding pass triggered a pause on the screen. A pause that turned into an excuse, then a decision, then a quiet act of erasure. As she was told her seat was suddenly unavailable due to a system issue. A phrase so vague it felt rehearsed, and before she could even question it fully, she was handed a replacement, an economy middle seat at the back of the plane. The downgrade delivered casually, almost mechanically, as if dignity could be reassigned with a single keystroke. And what made the moment chilling wasn't just the downgrade itself, but what followed seconds later. When another passenger approached, well-dressed, confident, familiar to the agent, and within moments was warmly welcomed into the exact first-class seat that supposedly no longer existed. The contrast so stark, it didn't need words. And still, she didn't raise her voice, didn't demand a supervisor, didn't create a scene. Because some battles are won not by confrontation, but by observation. And as she walked down the jet bridge holding a boarding pass she never should have been given, the test had already begun. Inside the aircraft, the divide was unmistakable. Soft lighting and calm smiles in the front, tight aisles and rushed efficiency toward the back. And as she passed through first class, she saw the man now seated comfortably where she should have been, champagne in hand, completely unaware or uninterested in the quiet injustice that had benefited him. And when she finally reached her seat, near the lavatories, cramped and uncomfortable, she settled in, not as a defeated passenger, but as a witness. Because every interaction mattered now, every glance, every tone, every policy selectively enforced. And sure enough, the service reflected the same hierarchy: laughter and warmth in first class, impatience and restriction in economy. Even something as small as a bottle of water becoming a symbol of who deserved comfort and who didn't. And still she remained calm, collecting details rather than reactions, understanding that patterns reveal more than protests ever could. When she eventually stood to use the restroom, choosing the nearest available one rather than waiting in a crowded line, the situation escalated in a way that revealed the heart of the problem. As a flight attendant physically blocked her path, her voice sharp with authority, citing policy not supported by federal regulation, framing a simple human need as an act of defiance. And when the passenger calmly explained her rights, the response wasn't correction or clarification, but accusation, the word unruly introduced like a weapon, heavy with implication, turning compliance into threat and dignity into disobedience. And it was at that moment the cabin shifted. other passengers noticing, sensing something deeply wrong, one even speaking up, questioning why a situation so small was being inflated into something dangerous. And that challenge to authority only hardened the attendant's resolve, prompting her to summon the captain as if the presence of a calm, composed woman asserting her rights constituted a security risk. And when the captain arrived, the contrast was immediate. A professional trained to assess facts rather than ego, listening carefully as two versions of the same event unfolded, one filled with exaggeration and control, the other delivered with clarity and restraint. And then came the sentence that changed everything. Spoken without drama, without threat, simply stated as fact that her original seat had been first class, that she had been downgraded without consent, that this was not an isolated moment but part of a larger pattern. And as the captain processed this, the realization set in that this wasn't a misunderstanding, it was exposure. And when she finally revealed who she was, not through shouting but through identification, a federal compliance investigator conducting an active civil rights audit, the air inside the plane seemed to freeze, because suddenly the power dynamic reversed completely, and those who had acted with confidence now faced consequences they never imagined. The flight attendant drained of authority, the gate agent's decisions now documented rather than dismissed, the airline itself thrust into the spotlight of federal oversight, and what followed wasn't chaos but procedure, quiet instructions, official communications, ground coordination. Because real power doesn't humiliate, it records. And as the plane landed and passengers remained seated, aware they had witnessed something rare, accountability unfolding in real time, the applause that followed wasn't for drama but for dignity, for restraint, for the reminder that justice doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it sits quietly in an uncomfortable seat and lets others reveal the truth. And in the days and months that followed, the consequences rippled far beyond that flight. Internal investigations, employee suspensions, policy overhauls, mandated training, public accountability, all traced back to one decision at a gate made under the assumption that no one importer was watching. And that is the danger of prejudice disguised as procedural. It assumes invisibility. It assumes silence, and it assumes the wrong person every time. Because dignity is not a privilege reserved for premium cabins, it is a right. And this story matters because it reminds us that the systems we trust are only as fair as the people enforcing them. And that quiet resolve can dismantle arrogance more effectively than outrage ever could. And if there is one lesson this flight left behind, it's this: you never truly know who you are underestimating, and that truth, revealed at 35,000 feet, is exactly why stories like this must be told, remembered, and never repeated.